Hello everyone and welcome to my Y&R Insider 24 update channel. Kyle splits up with Claire. What happened on The Young and the Restless? On The Young and the Restless, Billy and Jack Claire arrived at the Abbott mansion, and Kyle invited her in. She voiced surprise that he'd suggested they have breakfast there, but she reasoned that it was a good place to talk. He confirmed that it was part of the reason he'd changed the location. In Italian, Harrison rushed in and gave her a hug. Harrison lamented that returning to school sounded dull. Claire anticipated that his friends would be happy to see him, and Kyle hinted that there might be cupcakes on the boys' first day back. Harrison's mood brightened, and Kyle instructed his son to tell Mrs. Martinez he was ready to go. Harrison begged Kyle and Claire to take him to school. Kyle asked if Claire minded, and she enthused that it was a great idea. Harrison applauded and pulled them into an awkward group hug. After dropping Harrison off at school, Kyle and Claire returned to the mansion. Kyle noted that the house had seemed quiet without his son, and he was glad to have his little buddy back. Kyle thanked Claire for going along with Harrison's request to take him. Claire said she was glad the boy had wanted her there, and Kyle remarked that Harrison hadn't been the only one. Kyle and Claire talked about their jobs and how Kane's return had upset their families over breakfast in the dining room. Kyle commented that it was nice to just hang out like they used to, since it felt like forever since they'd just been normal together. They couldn't pretend that things were going well between them when they weren't, and Claire said that it was time for them to talk about their relationship. Kyle recognized that he and Claire couldn't just fall back into the way things used to be, but he was at a loss about what more he could do to fix the damage he'd caused. Claire wasn't sure her confusion was because of anything he'd done. She explained that she'd realized the power she'd given to everyone in her life to give her guidance about their relationship, but what she was feeling wasn't about him or them as a couple, it was about her. Claire cited how quickly she'd dived into a relationship with Kyle, and she hadn't had the skills to cope when things had gotten rocky because of her lack of experience. She admitted that she'd looked to other people to tell her what to do when she should have trusted her own instincts. Claire believed she needed to get out into the world and make her own mistakes and decisions without looking to anyone for their permission. It sounded like she was breaking up with him, Kyle thought. Claire insisted it was best for her right then, and possibly best for both her and Kyle in the long run. Kyle protested that he'd expected to move in together and eventually get married someday because they loved one another. Claire said softly that she still loved him and that it wouldn't last forever. She appealed to him to give her the room to be on her own for a while and not fight her on it. Kyle reeled as she walked out. Later, in the park, Claire pulled herself together and called Holden. She inquired whether his offer to take her to Los Angeles was still active. Victor told Nick, and Victoria at the new Newman Ranch that they had things to talk about that couldn't wait until Adam and Chelsea got back from running the Newman media business. Nick pointed out that they did not know if Kane had been involved in Colin's previous scam, but Victor revealed that Kane had not taken Victor's threat to expose it seriously. Victor barked that by the time Newman Media was through, the world would know Kane had been part of it. Victor intended to wait and see what Kane's next move was. Victor was certain that Kane was not yet prepared for Armageddon, but Nick was concerned that Kane might plant the AI and attempt to take over Genoa City's businesses. Victor divulged that Jack had been there the night before to make the desperate proposition that they work together to defeat Kane. Victor elaborated that he and Jack suspected Jill had more influence on Kane than even Lily did. Victor continued that Kane admired Jill and that he wouldn't want her to think he was anything but the son she wished she had. Victor hoped Jill could convince Kane not to go to the dark side, and once Kane was vulnerable, they'd crush him. Nikki was worried that Victor would use Jack's offer of an olive branch against him after Victoria and Nick left. Victor testily asked why she cared. Nick and Victoria said at Society that Victor and Jack's collaboration would fail. Victoria doubted Jill would work with them to take Kane down, and she bemoaned that it had hurt Billy deeply that Jill had seemed to favor Kane. Nick imagined that if Billy got word of what Victor and Jack were planning, it would blow the whole thing wide open. Nick opined that Kane was a greedy bastard who was accustomed to having it all and wanted more, yet Kane didn't have Lily. Nick suspected Kane would try to take over the world because he had no personal life. Victoria found it sad, but Nick ordered her not to feel sorry for Kane. Nick added that he needed to go out of town, and he had to know Victoria wasn't going soft. Victoria demanded to know where he was going and who was going with him. Nick let Noah know that his son wanted advice and that Noah might have a backer for a new club in Los Angeles. Nick confessed that he was taking the trip with Sharon, but he didn't want Victoria's opinion. Victoria acknowledged that it would probably be good for him to get away during the mess. She also planned to distance herself and let Victor and Jack figure things out. Audra and Sally got together in Chancellor Park. Before they went for a run, Audra wanted to share some potential career opportunities she had created. Sally announced that there had been a slight change of plans, since Abbott Communications might be back on track. Sally recapped her conversation with Billy the night before and claimed that they'd had a breakthrough. Audra doubted Sally had gone straight home to bed to think it over afterward. Sally shared that she'd given Billy the ultimatum that he either drop going after Chancellor or drop her, and he'd chosen to stay with her. A skeptical Audra questioned why Sally was working so hard to convince her, or to convince herself. Audra reminded Sally of their mission to create something for themselves without a man defining them or their future. Sally reasoned that she'd already built Abbott Communications, which was ready to launch. Sally asserted that she'd remain CEO with Billy in second position, and Audra would remain a key player. Audra balked at the thought of having to report to Billy. Sally offered to stipulate that Audra would be working directly for Sally in her contract. Sally intended to ramp things up right away as soon as their funding was back in place. A stunned Audra realized the company had no money. Sally contended that Billy was meeting with Jack to get things back on track. Audra expected that Jack would tell Billy to forget it, and she griped that they were once again at mercy of two men making decisions about her and Sally's future. At Jabot, Jack initiated a video call with Jill and observed that she looked well. Because Jack rarely contacted her in this manner, Jill assumed that someone was in trouble. She guessed that whatever was falling apart had to do with Billy. Jack explained that Billy had the impression that she had given Kane a pass while reprimanding Billy for each and every mistake he had made. Jill wondered if Jack felt the same way Billy did. She was informed by Jack that Kane was behind everything now that the stakes were higher. Jack insisted that it was Jill and Billy's issue to resolve. Jill hated where things stood between her and Billy, but she didn't understand why everyone viewed Kane as a threat. Jack implored her to jump on a plane and find out for herself, since it might change her perception of the surrogate son she enjoyed more than her own. Billy knocked on the door and asked if Jack had a minute for some family talk. Jack abruptly told Jill he'd be in touch, and he logged off. Jack sourly contemplated which version of Billy had walked through the door. Billy reiterated that he'd seen the light with Kane and worked things out with Sally, and he'd decided he needed to change. Billy declared that Abbott Communications was his primary concern and that he intended to persuade Jack to become the sole investor once more. Jack was tentative. Billy regretted that he'd pushed Jack to yank his funding. Jack lamented that they had traveled that path far too frequently, but Billy promised it would be the last time. Jack wanted to believe Billy was done with Kane and Chancellor, but he warned that Billy had pushed him too far that time. Billy incredulously asked if Jack was turning him down. Because Billy's words no longer had any meaning, Jack regretted that he had no choice. Billy pleaded that Sally had left an amazing career to join the company, and he argued that the money had already been earmarked. Jack imagined it would only be a matter of time before Billy decided to jump in and take control again, and Jack might need the money with too much at stake at Jabot. Jack made it clear that he could not assist Billy. Billy swore that he and Sally wouldn't let it die, and Jack sincerely wished them the best of luck. Billy left in a horde. On the Crimson Lights patio, Billy met Sally and Audra. Sally saw his expression and guessed Jack wasn't funding their company. Billy promised that it wasn't over, but he confirmed that Jack had reservations. Claire breaks up with Kyle. What happened on The Young and the Restless? Despite the fact that everything appeared to be at peace on the surface, the early morning air surrounding the Abbott mansion carried a mixture of anticipation and quiet tension. Claire felt as though she had entered a chapter of her life that had been filled with hope, joy, and the kinds of possibilities that only young love can bring when she approached the familiar front door. She couldn't hide her mild surprise at the breakfast invitation when Kyle invited her inside. The Abbott estate was not the sort of casual spot she expected for such a meeting, but she quickly reasoned aloud that it was a good place to talk neutral ground that carried both history and meaning. Kyle admitted, with a sheepish but deliberate tone, that this had been part of his reasoning for choosing the location. Even though the foundation's walls now had cracks that neither of them could ignore, he wanted their conversation to take place somewhere that brought back memories of the foundation they had previously established. Their exchange, however, was quickly interrupted by the sound of youthful exuberance. Harrison, Kyle's son and the center of his world, burst into the room beaming with the kind of happiness that only a child could. His face lit up when he saw Claire, and he ran toward her, wrapping her in a hug that spoke volumes about how deeply she had become a part of his young life. Ciao. His excited little voice was heard as he spoke to her in Italian. It was a bittersweet experience for Claire. Her presence in Kyle's life was never just about the two of them. She had woven herself into the boy's world as well, and leaving would not only break Kyle's heart but also put Harrison's stability in jeopardy. Harrison's embrace was filled with affection. As children frequently do, Harrison shifted the conversation immediately to his own concerns. The thought of returning to school after a carefree summer felt unbearable to him, and he expressed his dread with a pout. Claire, with the tenderness that had made her bond with him so genuine, reassured him that his friends would be thrilled to see him again. She painted a picture of a reunion filled with laughter and familiarity, but Kyle, always eager to sweeten the deal for his son, teased that there might even be cupcakes on his first day back. Harrison's mood improved as a result of that promise, which gave him a gleam in his eye. Still, the boy wasn't ready to end his morning spent with Claire and his father. Harrison insisted that they take him to school together after Kyle suggested that he get ready. Always considerate, Kyle asked Claire if she would mind, and she enthusiastically agreed. It was a momentary reprieve from the storm that loomed, a shared family-like experience that culminated in Harrison pulling both adults into an awkward but heartfelt group hug. The ride to school was filled with the kind of simple chatter that temporarily masked the undercurrents of unease. Dropping Harrison off felt routine, yet symbolic. The innocence of a child stepping into his structured day contrasted sharply with the complicated decisions the adults faced. When Kyle and Claire got back to the mansion, the house was very quiet. In a confession that revealed not only his love for Harrison but also his growing fear of emptiness in other areas of his life, Kyle admitted that he had missed hearing his son's voice fill the rooms. He sincerely thanked Claire for participating in the school drop-off. She responded with equal warmth, noting how meaningful it was that Harrison had wanted her there. Kyle, trying to bridge the distance he felt growing between them, added that Harrison wasn't the only one who wanted her presence. His gentle way of letting her know that he needed her still, perhaps more than ever. Breakfast was served in the dining room with a false sense of normalcy. The two talked casually about their jobs and touched lightly on how Kane's return had affected their families and businesses. Kyle, momentarily slipping into nostalgia, confessed how nice it felt to sit across from her like this, to laugh and talk casually. He described it as feeling like forever since they had simply been normal together. But Claire gently dismantled his illusion, her eyes filled with determination. And sorrow. She told him they could not pretend things were normal when they were not. She insisted that it was past time they confronted the truth about their relationship with words that bore the weight of inevitability. Kyle, ever the fixer, acknowledged her point but admitted he felt lost. He had tried to repair the damage, to patch the cracks with apologies and gestures, yet nothing seemed to restore them to what they once had been. But Claire, in a moment of clarity that was both painful and liberating, told him her confusion wasn't about his actions or their love. It was about her. She made an open admission, perhaps for the first time, that she had delegated too much power to others, including Kyle himself, allowing them to direct her actions and set her course. She had skipped the slower lessons of self-discovery and had jumped headfirst into a relationship with him. She realized she didn't have the tools she needed to deal with the inevitable difficulties. Instead of trusting her instincts, she had turned outward, searching for validation and permission she should have given herself. Her voice trembled with both fear and strength as she explained that she needed to step out into the world alone. In order to live without relying on the advice or expectations of others, she needed to make mistakes, fall and rise on her own terms, and live. Kyle, stricken by her words, finally put voice to the dread that had been building in his chest. It sounds like you're breaking up with me. After that, there was silence that was louder than any argument. Claire softly nodded, fighting back tears. It wasn't about the absence of love, she still loved him deeply, but she believed stepping away was the only way forward for her. She told him it was best for her right now, and possibly best for both of them in the long run. Kyle's heartbreak spilled out in protests. He admitted that he had imagined them moving in together, starting a life, getting married, and finding happiness. To hear his plans being dismantled in real time felt like watching the ground fall away beneath him because they had been clearly drawn up. Claire's response was firm but tender. She informed him that her love was still present and that this choice did not have to last forever. She begged him not to fight her on it, to allow her the space she needed. Her departure was slow, deliberate, each step toward the door echoing like a drumbeat of finality. Kyle stood frozen, reeling from the blow, as the woman he loved walked away to reclaim herself. Later, Claire was by herself in the park and gathered her composure by leaning against a bench. The air was different, more open and unsure. She pulled out her phone and dialed Holden, her voice quiet but determined as she asked if his offer to show her Los Angeles was still open. Even though it meant closing the book on Kyle for the time being, it was the beginning of a new chapter for her.